official introduction is required, so we know each other. And this day, we'll be talking about another important aspects of school education, that is assessment aspect. So let me share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
It is visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Visible.
Fine. Okay, so this is the major important aspects of our school education system. At the end, we try to assess them, and it is this assessment which talks about the quality of education. So it is from that perspective. So as we are in the teacher education program, we are already aware of these kinds of activities. Let us reflect on them and try to understand what exactly is the policy is talking about, NEP is talking about, and how do we need to go about it, and what are the changes that we need to adopt into our pedagogical practices and also into our assessment procedures. So what does NEP 2020 is talking about in terms of its assessment vision? So it says that assessment that is there in our culture of school education is primarily focusing on the rote learning, and it is on the summative assessment, which needs to be discouraged. And we want to make it assessment more regular, and at regular interval of time, it has to be done. And therefore, it says that it has to be informative assessment mode. So it is more, it promotes competencies and it promotes learning and development of students and the higher order teaching skills. Okay. So this is the another aspects that we need to look at it. And it also tests the higher order thinking skills of the learner and developing the critical thinking and the conceptual clarity that has to be visualized when we are going for teaching and also assessing these kinds of concepts. It also says that the purpose of assessment will indeed be for learning. So that means here we have varieties of assessment. Among them, we need to focus more on assessment for learning. And when we are going for assessment for learning, then we have to go for student-centric approaches, student-centric assessment strategies also. And it is should also enable both the teacher and the students to visualize the essence of the assessment, and it should have the impact on the entire schooling system. So therefore, it insists that there must be a continuous revision of our teaching learning process to optimize learning and development of all learners. So it is not targeting only one particular category of learners. It is talking about all kinds of learners also to be developed. So that is what the thing is. And this will be the underlying principles for assessment at all levels of education. So that means your underlying principle is that we need to go for assessment for learning. So when we are using more of assessment for learning, it indirectly tells us that we are embracing the constructivist approach of teaching and learning process. And thereby we are trying to empower the learners in terms of their varieties of abilities, including the knowledge competencies, the skills that are involved along with the competence and along with the content knowledge, and the skills that are involved in learning the particular content. So we need to go for enhancing the learning outcome of the learners and also see that their potentials are developed to the maximum extent, and whatever they learn, they must be able to apply it in any given context. So that is the essence, underlying principles of assessment at any level that we want to carry out. So as we know that there are varieties of functions of assessment. Okay. So primarily we can look at that assessment for learning is one aspect. And another factor is that assessment of the teacher's activities. So it is, since we are dealing with teaching learning process, both the teacher and learners, both of them are involved in the process and both of them must be considered. So it is in that perspective, we are talking about the first function of assessment is to facilitate learning. So how is that our assessment should enhance the learning activity? It should not be construed as an end activity and it is only to assess the learner to make a judgment. It is also to be looked in terms of the scope for making modifications, suggesting varieties of alternative for learners to learn and try to reach the mastery level. So it is in that perspective, it says that essence of assessment is to facilitate the learning activity. So how do we do this? As a teacher, so we try to see that we try to achieve the set objectives for the lesson, instructional objectives, or it is learning objectives or teaching objectives, whatever objectives you climb, by which perspective you want to say. From that, you say that at the end of a given period of time, maybe 45 minutes or 1 hour of deliberation, I must be able to achieve these kinds of set objectives, which you have set in realistic context. That is, you have looked into your learner context, the learner background, your classroom environment, your pedagogical approach, from all the elements that are involved in the teaching learning process. You have considered that. Based on those factors, you have set your objectives, which are realistic in nature and which you must able to attain it at the end of a stipulated period. So it is in that context, our learning objectives plays an important role in giving direction to the assessment also. And it also talks about is the learners are motivated to learn. So as we know that intrinsic motivation is more desirable rather than extrinsic motivation. Giving external motivation, it works only temporarily, but developing internal motivation is very much important. So it is that intrinsic motivation comes to intrinsic interest. Intrinsic attitude and aptitude one develops in that particular learning environment, only then the intrinsic motivations comes into play. And it should also see that this assessment will also help her to monitor the learning activity. As we know that each learners learn in different styles, each learner has a different pace of learning, and therefore they require different learning environment, they require different learning activities. So when we give these kinds of multiple activities in the classroom, which caters to the different needs of the learners in the classroom, I need to monitor their learning activities. I need to look at that. So therefore, my assessment will enable me to monitor that. It will also assist me as a teacher to see which learners requires more time, which learners require extra activities, which learner has average activities, things to be done. All those things I can do. And I can bring in those changes in the classroom. So all we try to do is to see that to achieve the learning outcomes. So learning outcomes are the stipulated, extended, external result oriented learning outcomes that we visualize that every learner should demonstrate that in a given context. It is not just answering the question paper. It is their ability to develop that. So it is therefore we say that when we say in the learning, there must be some motor skill development. There is an individual personal growth should also be involved, and their intellectual ability and cognitive development, knowledge sharing, all these activities should happen in the learning process. So therefore, this learning perspective gives much importance to all these activities. So when you consider from the teacher's perspective, it is a teacher who decides which pedagogical approach is suitable for what kind of knowledge I am dealing with. Is it a conceptual knowledge, or is it a procedural knowledge, or is it a factual knowledge that I am going to deliver or transact in the classroom? Accordingly, the assessment will tell us which pedagogical approach is better. Whether it is inductive approach is better, or a deductive approach is better, or a problem solving ability is better, or an inquiry based approach is better. So it enables me to say that if I analyze the kinds of knowledge that I am dealing with, it gives us a direction and insight into which approach is best suitable and which enhances the learning among the learner without any much difficulty. So that is what this uh, assessment will tell us. So the purpose of that is to make improvement in our own approaches and also in the improvement of learning among the learners. So I can bring in the pedagogical approach. I can explore the kind of learning resources I need to bring it. Is it a chart, or is it a model, or is it a animations that I want to bring in? If so, how it is going to be facilitating the learners? Okay, so it is these kinds of activities I'll be able to think. I can also think about whether it is going to be an individual activity or a group activity. If it is a group activity, how I am going to use my cooperative learning strategies in that perspectives. So it is these kinds of all consideration has to be looked at when we are going to teach. And all these activities will help us in deciding what kind of assessment I have to do. Whether I am going to do oral assessment, or it is a paper pencil test, or it is a performance based test, which enables me to ensure that the learning has happened. So it is these kinds of things will happen if the teacher visualizes assessment as a tool, as an assistant for enhancing his teaching proficiency. And next function of the assessment is, it is for institutionals for developing their own benchmarks and standards. For them, we can do that. Or for your own professional requirements also, you can enhance your assessment abilities and you can do that. So your professional abilities requirement may be in terms of the kind of assessment system the school has adopted. Now still we are have moved into the grading systems, and still we are using the marking system. So we are using either absolute grading or relative gradings and try to make an interpretation based on the grading system that is there. And we also bring them in terms of the standards the school has performed or an institution has performed. So that means here assessment is there to establish your own standards or your own creation of benchmarks in your own field, and try to look at that from the institutional perspectives only. So it is done. So that means we can say assessment is benefiting the learners, it is benefiting the teacher, and it is also benefiting the institution. So all the three components have to be addressed at a single time. So you must visualize that assessment has a wider implications in the entire schooling or in the educational scenario. And now you know that types of assessment. The one is assessment of learning, which is a summative kind of assessment. So it means that learning process must have happened and there must be a lapse of time to recollect what has been learned. So if there is a gap between what is learned and what is to be recalled, only then we say it is a kind of summative assessment. We are going to do that. So we know that summative assessment, we try to do it in our semester system as a semester end examination, or in annual examinations, or in midterm examination. These kinds of activities are done where the content knowledge is summated over a period of time. The learning competencies are summated over a period of time, and they are going to be tested and at a given time. So therefore, it becomes more of summative. And the policy says that these kind of summative assessment encourages only the rote learning. It is only mechanical learning. We need to discard that. We have to use them very minimal. So they don't say that you cannot use it. They say that you can use them very minimal. And you can try to see whether the student is able to demonstrate the learning that he has done. And the second kind of learning that the policy is insisting and is emphasizing is that assessment for learning. So which we know that it is a formative assessment. So where the new ideas are being floated with the content knowledge background. So the child is creating that ideas, he is visualizing those ideas, he is trying to form the image of that idea in his brain where the schemas are formed. With that schema, the characteristics has to be added, their uniqueness factor has to be added. So therefore, the the image becomes very, very clear and has a precision in their child's mind. So when these kinds of cognitive activities are happening while forming the ideas, in that process, if the teacher adopts formative assessment, there is a scope to check whether the learner is forming those ideas in the right direction or not. If it is not, then the teacher can scaffolding, chip in, and support the learner with corrective measures. He can direct him, support him, saying that it is wrong. This is the way you need to approach it. So there is a scope for making improvement in the formation of idea itself in the beginning. If the wrong ideas are kept in mind, so we call them as misconceptions. And we know that concepts are the basic building blocks of the knowledge. So if the basic idea itself is not clear, then we cannot expect the stronger structure on those ideas. So therefore, your basic ideas must be ensured. So it is in that process, if you adopt any form of assessment, whether it is oral or it is written or performance or through questioning, if you are testing it, it indicates the way in which the child is forming those ideas. So in that scope, stage, there is a scope for the teachers to make corrections, make modification, either in the learning process of the learner or in their teaching approaches that they have brought in to this particular activity. So there is a scope for making immediate improvement or modification and facilitate it. So it is in that context, we say that form assessment for learning is more preferred rather than summit. And the next one we talk about is now from formative assessment, we need to move towards authentic assessment, assessment as learning. So that means here, it encourages that even the learner should be made part and parcel of your assessment process. From the beginning of the assessment itself, starting from fixing of the criteria or fixing of the assessment objectives, you need to involve the learner in the entire process, make them the partners in the process, so that they will also know how assessment is being carried out. What are the parameters or criteria that are to be considered for assessing, and how those criteria are observed, how they are monitored, how they are measured, how they are assessed. So these factors are also be learned by the learner as they go on in the process of learning, and also they know the process of assessment. So when they do that, then we say that it becomes authentic assessment. So that means here, whatever the learning they have done in the classroom process, they must demonstrate the same abilities in their real life context. That is outside the classroom context also. If they're able to demonstrate those kinds of competencies or abilities that they have possessed based on the content knowledge, then we say it is an authentic assessment. Okay. So it is, that is what the policy is talking about. So they don't believe in our certifications or our gradings or in any other thing. They want the individual to demonstrate that through actions and through performance. So when it is being done, then we say the assessment as learning is very, very meaningful. So now we need to move towards assessment as learning. Though we are following assessment for learning now, so as a precursor, we need to move towards assessment as learning. So that is the other aspects that we are trying to look at. Now, if we are doing assessment as learning, then it emphasizes that there is a scope for learners to participate in the assessment procedures, and thereby they can go for peer assessment, where they are trying to make a comparison among their own age mate or classmate and the same group work that they have carried out. And then they will try to analyze why they are superior and why my work is not up to that mark. And he will visualize where are the mistakes he has committed and where is the scope for making improvement. So these things will happen when we involve them and encourage them to do the peer assessment. And finally, it talks about the self-assessment. The entire activity is focused on constructivism. It is learner-centered approach that we are talking about. So when the learner is learning, now we are facilitating learning now in the constructivist approach. The ultimate aim of that is making every learner to become independent learners. So that is auto learners. They can learn independently using varieties of resources that is available to them. So if we are able to do that, self-learning is happening, Then consequence of that self-learning activity is self-monitoring also has to happen to them. The way in which they think, the way they are able to visualize, they should have their own monitoring mechanism in place. That is cognitive activity once again. Then there comes the self-regulatory activities. How do I regulate my thinking process? How do I add my logical thought into my thinking process? How logical thinking and logical reasoning puts my ideas into a framework, and how do I make my decision whether it is correct or wrong on that particular logics. So it is these kinds of activities that we need to imbibe in terms of self-regulations, and ultimately it should end up in self-evaluation. Okay, so that is self-assessment. You should know what I have done. Did I achieve what I aspire to achieve? If so, to what extent I have done, on what I need to do. So these kinds of introspections and reflections on their own learning activity has to happen. So therefore, they insist on carrying out self-assessment. So empowering the learner to do their self-assessment will happen only when you have involved the learner in your assessment procedures. So this means when you focus on bringing assessment as learning and encouraging the learner to become part of the assessment process only, then the self-assessment activity by the learners becomes very, very easy. So it is in that way, these are the major things that we are trying to do that. Then finally, as we are doing it now, we use the teacher assessment is being done. And when we do that, so we adopt either we are going on norm reference testing pattern, or we are using criterion reference testing criteria. Using those, we try to assess the learners. So usually at the classroom level or at the institutional level, we go for CRT. If it is at the district level or the state level, at the national level, we go for the norm reference testing. So it is these kinds of differences that we have, the practices that we have in the system present right now, and we can try to use them. That means we have all kinds of assessment that we do, whether it is self-assessment, peer assessment, or teacher assessment. Every assessment has to happen based on certain preset criteria, and these preset criteria emerges from your preset learning objectives or teaching objectives. So therefore, our teaching objectives will give us an indication regarding what kind of assessment strategies and procedures we need to adopt so that your assessment become more authentic and more realistic. So it is in that perspective, these factors are looked into. Now, we are using varieties of tools of assessment, and all of us are knowing about them. So first one is the observation. So it is a very common tool that we use, but it has to be used very scientifically and systematically. It is not the casual observation. It is a deliberate observation. And if you use them as a tool, then we can believe that you have a purpose of making observations. And if you provide any comments or critical feedback to the learner, it must help them to rectify their things. So observation is the one of the important tools that we use. The second one is the questionnaire, which is common, which we call it as in terms of test or question, examination question paper. Based on the marking, based on the time, we vary them and call by different names. So in many schools, tests are conducted, weekly test, and then it is a monthly test. Okay, then it is surprise test, slip test. They call by different names, but the nature and the kind of questions varies. Next is, so we are encouraging apart from only by using the question paper or test and examination as a tool. So the teacher has to be empowered to see the alternative tools also. So here it is a checklist where we need to say that checklists are used only when we want to see the presence or absence of a criteria or a construct or a trait in a learner. So if you are particular about only knowing those kinds of factors, only then you are using the checklist saying that yes, it is present or absent in a particular learner. Then we go to the rating scale. So where you want to see that every learner has ability to learn, but they have the varying factors of learning. So the relative factors are there. Then you want to see where they stand on a particular scale that you want to measure it. You want to rate them. So then we are going to use rating scales. Either you may use 3-point rating scale or 5-point rating scale or 7 or 9. If you increase the rating points, then your comparison quotient increases. If you reduce it, comparison becomes very, very narrow. So it is these kinds. So it is like rating their physical, like attitudinal aspects towards the subject. Okay, learning mathematics, learning science, learning English. Do they have favorable attitude or not? Okay, so then if not, then what measures I need to make, what remediations I have to take up so that their unfavorable attitude shifted over a period of time to favorable attitude. So only these kinds of things, if you want to see, which are all absolute and criteria and referenced factors, only then you are able to use the rating scales. For example, if you can assess the student handwriting, everybody writes, but everybody handwriting is not good. So some are readable, some are not readable, some are scribbled. So if you want to rate them, which is best among all these, so then you are going to use the rating scales. So it is these kinds of tools that we are supposed to use. Then it is the anecdotal records. So where it is an extraordinary event, the student does on any given, any occurring situation, and those extraordinary events are documented, which depicts their extraordinary courage and skills they have that they have demonstrated on a given context, and that is to be looked in, is reported in his progress card, and that gives an indication regarding what kind of personality he has and what he is likely to become in future. So that kind of those instances will give an indication about the futuristic activity of that particular learner. So if that such things are also there, you can try to look at it. Next is the cumulative records. So where it talks about the progress of the learner from the grade 1 or from pre-primary education up to the plus two level. If the child has all the progress card put in one progress report card book, then you will see that gradually whether the child has a progressive trend, or does the child shows a static level, or does it child shows there is a sudden increase or there is a sudden decline in each class-wise performances. You can understand those why such phenomena is happening and what the child requires and how it could be addressed. So this is earlier during our days of schooling, we used to get the cumulative records. Now in schools, they have not practiced, but still it is also one of the way in which we can make an assessment about the child's learning periodically across different time. Next is now the NCF 2005, and the new policy is also talking about going for assessment for learning. So when you are going for assessment for learning, even it talks about holistic development of the learner, and therefore we need to give learning environment which caters to his cognitive, physical, psychomotor, emotional, all factors, domains has to be developed. So when all these activities are being done, provided to the learner in the school, the child performs varieties of activities in different areas. So in collaboration with the learner, pick up the best performance in those areas, compile them, put them in a file format. So that becomes the portfolio of the learner. It gives an indication regarding in which domain the child is very proficient, in which domain is lacking behind, and how those domain activities needs to be supported. So these can be looked at. So when we are trying to look at. So when you are using rubric, it is only the compilation of the child's activities and indications. But when you want to assess that, the entire portfolio activity, and if you want to put that into assessment practices, then the teacher has to create or develop a rubric. A rubric is a matrix, as you are seeing here. It is a three-dimensional matrix. So where the top, you are talking about the criterias. You write here criterias here, and you list out the criterias that you are trying to figure it out for each of them. And on the top column, you will fix the rating scale or level at which you want to measure them. So you are going to fix it, whether it is 3-point, 5-point rating scale that you want to do it, you will write here. And then in each block, you need to have the descriptors. So that is, what is this criteria it is, and at this level, how it has to be looked at, and how I am going to observe that. So all these detailing has to be written very completely. When this rubric is prepared, for assessing the portfolio, then the teacher can use it very objectively. So there is no subjective element that creeps in. It can be as objective as possible, and accordingly, he can assess the portfolio. So portfolio, they themselves cannot be assessed directly. The teacher has to construct rubrics for assessing the portfolios. So they are not readily available. The teacher has to develop them because the portfolios are created based on the learner's context and the learning environment the school has provided. So therefore, it has to be school-wise, and the content-wise specific rubric has to be developed. Next, as we go on for doing, they are all those gives the qualitative data, and you can do the qualitative analysis of those. Now, if you want to come to understand them very qualitatively in terms of how well they have understood, how well they are going to perform, then we need to go to the other forms of tools, that is having an interview. So as we know that interviews can be conducted using the structured or unstructured interview. So usually we go for unstructured interview, where it helps us to know the in-depth understanding of the learner's learning or their own understanding about the given task or a given context. So it is that going deeper into their understanding, interview will help us. And the next one is the focus group discussion, where if you want to work in a group and there must be a group decision, collective work has to happen, then in such cases, the focus group discussions needs to be emphasized, where the focus is on the context or the knowledge that is going to be discussed. And in that, each one will have their own ideas that can be shared. Some can be accepted, some can be rejected, and finally, they can come to their own conclusions. So it is the essence of this focus group discussion. Okay, the final one that we try to see is the project work that we assign to the students in various contexts. And we also use this project work and showcase them in an exhibition, an annual day or a school exhibition. The varieties of project work from these different subject backgrounds are given, and the child is empowered to carry out this project work. Either it could be individual or group, but in the social learning context, we encourage group project work, not individual project. So where each learner will learn the collaborative skills, cooperative skills, negotiation skills, communication skills, all these kinds of skills are involved. Though the product is going to be emerged out only based on the content knowledge, so these are the social emotional skills that learners are likely to develop when you are trying to give the project work. So these are the certain things that we can talk about, we can see as the tools that we can think about. And the policy is talking about reforms in the board examination. So these are known to you also. So in the RT Act 2016, so it has been amended, and there are going to be public examination at class grade 3, 5, and 8, apart from your board examination 10th and 12th. So till now we had only 10th and 12th standard board exam. Now the RT Act says that schools can opt for 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade examination as a board examination. The board will supply the question paper. It is conducted in the school, but evaluated by the teachers in their own school context. So that is what the examination reforms is talking about. Then at the board level examination, it talks about 2 types of examination, patterns of question papers, part A and part B. Part A invariably it talks about objective type question, and part B is talking about the subjective or descriptive type, where in the objective type, they talk about only using the multiple choice questions as the predominant objective type of questions to be used. And descriptive type, depending on the nature of subject that is there. So you can create short answer or long answer type of things. And to strengthen the assessment procedure and to bring in quality in the assessment procedure also, a new board is going to be set up. It is already functioning in NCERT. It is called as PARAG. It is Performance Assessment Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. So this is a new body apart from our CBSE board and state boards. So this is also another body that has been already created functioning under NCERT, where they are trying to come out with a quality kind of preparing question paper, administering, and all those things. So it is a standard setting body. So it has been created as a standard setting body to enhance and increase the quality education across the country. And the next, another reform the policy is talking about is National Testing Agency, creating NTA. So where, as you know that, all ITEP courses, so that is Integrated Teacher Education Program, which has already been practiced in more than 50 institutions across the country, are being tested through National Testing Agency. So it is from that common entrance examination only the selected candidates can opt for the institution where they want to pursue their ITEP course, and that they can do. So it is in the future. So all kinds of entrance examinations are going to be done only by National Testing Agency. And here the emphasis is on formative assessment by different modes. Among them, self and peer and criteria and reference portfolio rubrics are most preferred. And when you are trying to look at this holistic assessment, that holistic assessment should be seen in terms of development of personal social qualities. PSQ is personal social qualities. So that means you have to look at the physical development, the social development, and the value development of the child along with your curricular areas. So when you look at that, only then holistic assessment talks about. Then the policy is also talking about holistic report card, that is 360-degree assessment. So where it has to give the development of the learner in all the domains that you are trying to look at as the essential for holistic development of the learner. In that perspective, if you are trying to attempt and providing all kinds of situations there, then each one of us must adopt holistic assessment and focusing on PSQ and curricular areas. Now, let me come to our focal theme. What is exactly we mean by competency-based assessment and what is competency-based education? So competency-based education, it is an approach for teaching, learning, and assessment that focuses on students' demonstration of learning outcomes and attaining proficiency in particular competencies in a given subject. Okay, so that means whatever approach you are trying to do, if your focus is on students' demonstrations of those knowledge, competencies, and skills they have acquired in real life context, if they are able to do that, you are enabling them to perform that in that particular approach, then it is called competency-based education. So it implies that it emphasizes real-world application of knowledge and skills and authenticity of learning experiences. So that means here, whatever they learn in the classroom, they must apply it in the real-life context. Application of knowledge is more important here. So that is what our education should aim at. So when you are imparting knowledge, along with the knowledge, skills also is being delivered, and all those things has to be demonstrated in a authentic learning environment. So therefore, creating a experiential learning environment in your pedagogical approaches is a must. And that experiences, the learner must transform it from classroom context to real life context. So only then it is called as competency-based education. What are the key features of this competency-based education approach? First and foremost, it talks about equity for all students. So that means it emphasizes that in every actions, we need to embrace the inclusiveness. The inclusive education becomes part and parcel of your entire activity, and every child is treated equally, and whatever they require as an assistant to that, accordingly, you are going to provide all kinds of assistance to them. So that is what we mean by equity. And you should also say that all learners cannot learn in the same manner, same pattern. So because each one of us, individual differences are there. So therefore, I need to understand their individual differences, and I must be able to provide differentiated support-based activities. So that means if there are gifted students in my class, how do I support a unique separate activity for gifted students? If there are more average learners in my class, how do I deal with that group? If there are slow learners in my class, how do I deal with them? So if I have a blind child in my class, how do I deal with him? By providing aids and appliances which support the same learning activity, having the same learning experiences as visualized for the entire group. So that is what we mean by differentiated support based on students' individual learning needs. So that means every learner's need has to be understood, and accordingly you need to provide support to that. And whatever the progress you are able to see, say that is performing better or best, then all those things must be evidence based, must be there. So you must have the evidences, and based on those evidences only you can try to do that. So it is, how do you do that? In the mastery, we are looking at the mastery level of learning rather than only the time spent in the classroom. The child was very active, he is answering, he will do everything, but in examination when things are given, he is not able to perform, and he passes that paper with much difficulty. If such is the case, then there is what he says orally and what is performing in written form, there is a mismatch, and therefore that evidence, we take only the written form as the more authentic evidences rather than his oral performances. So therefore I cannot claim the child has done at the mastery level. So I must able to provide evidences, and I must say strive the learner to move towards mastery learning rather than that performance that he does in the class. Next, I need to use varieties of formative assessment, okay, where it talks about peer and self-assessment, and students are encouraged to reflect on their own work. So that means here we want the learners also to become reflective practitioners. The teachers are reflective practitioners. Teachers are research practitioners by doing action research. Okay, the teachers are also using the professional development appendix to understand their teaching learning strategies and style. All these enable them to reflect on their own actions, reflect on their own performances. And wherever they think there is a scope for modification, bringing in changes, that has to be brought in their next activity, and see that it gives you the required result. So it is the reflections that needs to be developed. That means no hasty conclusions, decision has to be done. It has to be deliberately analyzed, critically visualized. Only then you can able to make your final conclusion. So formative assessment means encouraging all kinds of learners and also indirectly encouraging them to adopt reflective practices in their learning approaches is also visualized. Now, what is the benefit of this competency-based education? So one is it develops higher order thinking skills among the learners. It encourages interdisciplinary approaches. While I am learning different subject, I can bring in interdisciplinary. And also it encourages them to become problem solvers, which is very much essential in the modern world and in any workplace. Problem solving ability is a must. So how do I develop this? So this competency based develops these kinds of higher level things. And it is also developing literacy and citizenship. So that means here, whatever they learn in the classroom, it is not only for the state, not only for the country, they need to compete with the global level. So since we know that in the vocational arena, multinational companies are coming into different our countries also. And when this particular learner has to be hired by them, means they will match with the learners across the globe. So therefore, we need to say that whatever is learning is to compete at the global level, not at the state or the national level. So our competition level has to be raised. So that is what it means. So don't focus only on classroom performance, your board examination, it is beyond that. Then this approaches enables us to see that is able to compete at the international level, not only at the national level. So we have to prepare them for facing the challenges at the international context. So these are the essence of our competency-based approaches, education approaches means. So in particular, what competency means? It is the ability to do something successfully or efficiently. Okay, so that means no, without having much difficulty in the performance, they must able to demonstrate the performance elegantly. So that is what we mean by efficiently. Or any given task is given, they must able to perform it without any hiccups and achieve success in that. If they're able to do anything in any knowledge background, it is called as a competency. It is defined as a combination of knowledge, skill, and attitudes appropriate to the context. Okay, so that means here competency doesn't come in isolation. It is a combination of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. It indicates the ability to apply learning outcomes adequately in a defined context. So that means here I cannot use my learning outcomes only to my classroom context only. I need to frame my learning outcomes, which can also be visualized, can be demonstrated by the learner, even in the real context also. So if he is able to do that, only then I consider them as my learning outcomes. So these learning outcomes, though they are based on the lesson is based on the content knowledge, but the acquisition of knowledge and transforming that knowledge and applying into real context is what the competency is all talking about. It is not limited to cognitive elements. So that means your thinking, intellectual, creative ability, interest only. It is not to that. It also encompasses the functional aspects. So using your thinking ability, how you use it for reading, writing, performance, and also using technological skills, as well as interpersonal attributes. So that is how we are able to deal with in a group or in an organizational skill, means how do you are able to visualize the entire program and how you are able to plan it, how you are able to execute it, and how we are going to evaluate. All these are also looked into. And finally, it talks about the ethical values. So whatever I am trying to learn, whatever I am going to put into action, is that socially, ethically correct or not? So it is these kinds of decision-making abilities one should develop within them. So if these are seen in totality, only then we say it is a competence. It is not only a cognitive activity. So it is a social, emotional, and even decision-making abilities also takes place. If that is happening, only then we say it is a competency based. So this is the complete picture of that. So combination of all these three, knowledge, skills, attitude is equal to competency. And in that, when you are trying to apply it, you must apply them in any given context, any situation. It can be situational based or it could be problem based context. And the underpinned values in that context, what are the essential values that have been visualized also to be looked at. So it is not just these 3, 4, even the values are also be looked into. Only then we say it is a competency approach. And then now we move on to when you are able to do that. So even if you look at that constructivist approach, it gives ample scope for developing these competencies. So that is by using your ZPD, you are trying to support the learner's abilities. You know that what a learner can do on his own, and with the help of the teacher, what extent he can enhance his abilities and perform better at the next level. So ZPD component comes into picture. So what you are supposed to do is what the scaffolding is talking about. So through that activity, you are trying to give varieties of learning activities to them, where they involve actively in those activities, they perform it. Through the performances, they gain experiences. From those experiences, they are able to apply it. The same thing into real life context. They transform the classroom learning activities into real life context and they demonstrate their learning skills. So it is that what we are trying to look at. So we want to see them whether they are able to perform in the realistic based or not. Okay. So it is this competency based assessment. It focuses, as we know, that more on formative and less on summative assessment. So when you want to embrace the formative assessment, then it has to be institutionalized. So that means it has to be your organization only. It has to be your school only. That means here it cannot be comparable with one school with another school. No comparisons are required. And this has to be standardized for subjects. So that means here in this particular year, in my subject, students have performed at 85% means you cannot complacent with that 85%. So next year you must say, I must aim that all my students are going to perform at 90% or more than that. So that means every year, every moment, there is a scope for rising your own standards that you have set for your own self, for your own students, that can be enhanced according to your school and the students' background. And when you are trying to achieve that, you can also monitor the fairness. So that is, whatever you are aspiring to, can that be performed by the students? So because students are involved, it is their outcomes that the teacher proclaims, I am successful, I am effective. If they are not able to perform, if they are not withstanding the pressures, like during examination, anxieties are there, stress are there. If students are not able to withstand that, have their own managing skills in that, but till teacher says you have to read 24, 20 hours, 18 hours, write 10 times, 100 times, so then students will not able to do that. So you have to look at what you are saying, what the student does. Is it fairly comparable? Can that be done by them? What I am insisting, can they able to perform without any stress and anxiety? So that is what you are supposed to look for in your fairness. A given percentage of the final grade to be derived from formative assessment. So that means here, you need not depend on your summative sole assessment. You have to say that whatever you are making a final comment decision on a particular learner, a majority of your decision must be based on your formative assessment. Only 10 to 15% you can depend on your summative assessment criteria. 85 to 90% you can depend on your formative assessments. So for this to happen, so we believe that every teacher educators must be trained in these kinds of activities, and every teacher must be trained to use varieties of formative assessment tools and techniques. And so that it helps, why we want to do that is, so it helps to improve the learning. It improves the learning among the learner, and the learning environment has to be changed. And it also helps the teachers to see what kind of interventions you are trying to adopt, how that intervention is working better or not. If not, what changes you are supposed to make, and how that changes is likely to bring the results. So that is what we say in terms of modify your interventions if required. Determine where change of pedagogical strategy is required. So whatever pedagogical strategy you might be using, say majority of us as a pedagogic teachers in the classroom, we adopt only lecture-based approach. So can we change that stance? No, we can also look into different way. Can we bring in the student also into that teaching learning process? Can we give activities in terms of seminar presentation? Can we ask them to do the group discussion? Can we have the panel discussions? These are the other alternatives a teachers can look into and try to see that even learners are involved in the teaching learning process, and even they are also empowered to do that. So what all this means, it says that if you are aiming to bring in, going towards the attaining the competency-based assessment means you have to bring changes not only in yourself, in your learner. So it says that you have to bring change in the environment of changes. So that means here, the learning environment has to be changed. The teaching learning environment has to change. The school has to support the teaching learning process with varieties of learning resources, varieties of creation of varieties of laboratories and activity rooms or resource rooms. So therefore, this is a total environmental change. It is not the change of only the teacher or of the learner. It is a total environmental change in the school system that needs to be looked at. Okay, so that is what it is talking about. So creating enabling environment for performance-based learning and transform assessment for checking the competencies required for the performance of the certain tasks. So this is what the total environmental change needs to be brought about. Okay, but still individual level, we can bring our own changes. At the institutional level, we can make changes to the extent possible, and all the changes should enable the learner to learn in a better way. And for all those things to happen, so these are the kinds of assessment we should go for. One is self-assessment, second is peer assessment, and third is group work assessment and project work assessment. All the four kinds of assessment, whatever you are going to do, it must be based on your criteria and reference testing, developing the portfolios, and constructing rubrics for assessing the portfolios. Okay, so these are the things that you need to create and keep that in your mind, and you can try to do that. Okay, now there are some sample items here. So can anyone read the first item and say it is testing which subject?
Sir, may I first one read?
Yes.
Sir, how many 10 bundle sticks packets formed with the 46 sticks? The options are 4. First one is 4, second one 6, third one
Okay.
10, fourth one 14.
Okay, so which subject, sir, it is trying to test? Subject knowledge.
The subject knowledge is from physics or maths.
Okay, so it focuses on mathematics. Though we say it is a mathematics, it is of class 3 or 5, where the child is made to understand 10 bundle sticks pockets. So it has to count the number of items in a bundle. You should know the meaning of a bundle and what makes it as a bundle and how many of them are there and how many sticks are given and what is that it. So what is the child is expected to do here?
So they have to make a bundles for 10 bundles packets sticks.
Okay. Okay. What skill he has to demonstrate here, sir?
I think it comes to the psychomotor domain, the skills, psychomotor domain skills.
Okay. Okay. In mathematically, in operational level.
Operational level, maths.
Ability.
And we can say that's learning by playing maxims.
Oh, but it is a paper pencil test, sir. It is not activity based.
Activity.
It is a paper pencil test.
Permutation and combination.
Yes. Okay. Here we are testing, though we are testing the division, idea of division of the child. Okay. Now multiple concepts are tested at a time. If the child doesn't understand the concept of bundle, if doesn't understand the idea of a stick, and if it doesn't understand 46 as a whole, and then what this I have to do. If you don't analyze it and visualize that, yes, I have to do addition here. Division here. Only then he is able to say, my answer is perfectly 4. Okay, so these kinds of questions, though they are not subject specific, though they are not directly saying which skill he has to demonstrate, it makes the child to see differently. Even he can also integrate what kind of stick it could be. It could be a toothpick, it could be a matchstick, or it could be any ordinary stick. He can compare with any other objects that he is able to see in the surrounding. And accordingly, he can contextualize the ideas and then he can work on those ideas and put it here. Though he has learned division in the classroom, with these same kind of experiences or examples, now he has to demonstrate the application of that in a given context. So this is what we mean by competency-based testing. So that means it doesn't, though the content is there at the background, it tests the core concept. It is not going to test individual concept and also related skills. He has to demonstrate the skills. Okay, we know that division is the it is a repetitive subtraction type. So how he is able to integrate those ideas and demonstrate which idea he is using and how best he is able to come to this answer. That is what it is. Similarly, second question, sir. Anyone, sir? Next.
May.
Yes, sir.
Fruits are shared among 6 members equally. How many fruits each one get?
Okay. So which subject, sir, it is?
It's a mathematics, sir.
Only mathematics, sir. Okay, fine. Though it talks about how many gets fruits, it is mathematics, but it is also talking about fruits. So you can talk about the environmental science or science in particular, and you can say what fruits is. You can analyze, is it eatable, non-eatable objects? Okay, you can visualize, is a fruit is a major concept, and what kind of fruit he can associate with, and how many, and he is able to divide that in a 6 member. So he can consider his own family And in that context, we can work out how this can be shared. So sharing is being asked. So sharing means division here. So can he apply the mathematical idea in this context and try to get the answer? So that is what is being tested. Yes, sir. Yes. Next, third question. Anyone?
A frog can jump
Hmm.
2 feet
Hmm.
distance, 2 feet
Okay.
distance at a time. Then
Yes.
how many times will it jump to cover 18 feet distance?
Yes. Yes, sir. Your analysis, sir.
So it's in biology subject, sir.
Yes. Okay. Though it is biology,
It's
ultimately
physics,
it turns out to be mathematics. So it is an
It's simple
integrative
mathematics.
approach. Okay. It is an integrative. It is not,
biophysics, professor.
yes. So it is not independent of one particular subject. So he has to bring in all the ideas that he has learned and then try to visualize, apply it to real context. So he should understand what frog is, how it is, and how when it jumps, to what extent it can jump. Is 2 feet, is it realistic or it is unrealistic? You can make an analysis of that. Okay, if that is to be understood as a virtual condition, then how he is going to do that? So though it is science, ultimately it turns out to be mathematics, and he is trying to analyze it and try to come to his own conclusion. So that is what the competition, this skills, competency based means. Yes, sir. Next question.
Sir, shall I?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The distance between book and our eye when we read is option A 30 centimeter, option B 30 meter,
Yes.
option C 30 millimeter, option D 30 inches.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Your answer and your reasons for that, sir.
I think my answer is option A, sir.
Okay, fine. Why do you think that is the correct one?
30 meter. So just I will take the explanation 1 minute. 30
Yes, sir.
meter is second one is too much bigger.
Yes.
30 millimeter is very shorter.
Yes.
30 inches is also very longer because
Long
Yeah.
distance.
we are going to read the something. We have to maintain the distance and thing. Have to read the carefully. If
Yes.
it is near, also will not visible. If it is
Yes.
long distance, is also not visible.
Okay. So is it testing the mathematical ability or it is science?
It's
So
a
it is a
physics
science.
also.
Both it's a physics and
Physics and
mathematics.
maths, bio.
Yes. So he has to now, he has to
And
make
also
it
biology.
that he is
And
trying to
also,
read.
sir, habit of reading.
Yes. No, but still, what is a normal reading distance that we are asking about? So you should know the position of keeping a book and what distance he has to make a reading. Okay. So therefore, it involves the practical reality here. And it also talks about the eye, the image formation, and the distance at which the object has to be kept and how the brain receives that. All these ideas are assimilated here.
And
Okay, it is
sometimes it
in,
may be depend upon the individual's vision factor also, no, sir?
yes, it is there, but whether it they will know that if this
Yes.
is the normal condition, if there is any defect means, then there is a defect in the vision. Either it is my short-sightedness or far-sightedness. So for that, for making corrections, I use the external aid and gadgets. And here you have to make centimeter, meter, millimeter, inches. Again, there is a comparisons of the system of measuring of the distance. Okay, the child has to visualize that also. He should analyze. So that means here, all ideas, though he has learned in different kinds of knowledge, he has to integrate it. When demanded, he has to bring in into his to its action. So that is what the competency is talking. Yes, sir. Next question, sir.
Sir, is it correct answer or not?
Oh, probably, sir. You have to check. I have not checked. Right. Yes. Next question. Anyone?
Yes,
We
correct.
use this type of energy for our better future needs.
Ah.
Non-renewable energy, natural gas, nuclear energy.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. What is the answer?
Renewable energy?
Renewable energy. Okay. Why do you think, madam?
Something protection of our environment, energy conservation.
Yes. So yeah, though it is talking about energy in physical science, so it talks about the conservation of environment, conservation of energy also. So it is in that concept how the child is visualizing himself as a consumer of the natural resources. So it is in that way how he is able to look at it, how he is going to answer that. So that is what the thing is. Okay, final question. Yes, anyone can read the last one.
Sir, arrange the following in an order which shows the arrival of Europeans to India.
Yes.
France, England, Portuguese, Holland. I think it is Portuguese, France, England and Holland.
So option 3.
Yes, sir.
It is option 3. Yes, madam. Why do you think, madam?
Thank
It
you,
is the
sir.
correct answer.
Sir, Portuguese came first, then came France. After that, English and France war has been taken place. Then Holland, not known, sir. Recently, it has added, I think. So for confusion, they have added, I think.
Okay. So what the question is testing, madam? It is the sequence or it is the reasoning behind the question?
Reasoning, sir.
It's a sequence, sir.
Though the
Reasoning.
question is talking about sequencing, the sequencing will come only after you do the reasoning. If you don't do the reasoning,
Both will be, sir.
apply in the right
Both.
direction, you will
Yes,
not
sir.
able to arrive at this sequence. Okay. So it is
Yes.
these kinds of questioning that we are able to do it. So if you can visualize that, all these questions are to a larger extent, they are content free. So that means they are not focusing on the essential core element of the subject elements only. You need to understand, visualize those elements and apply it into different contexts. So that is what the competency-based examinations are talking about. And this is the future days. These kinds of questions are going to come. Now it is being used in many of the competitive examination by various organizations, including your IIM, IITs, and even Indian Institute of Science and many other things. So these kinds of questions are being used to test the deeper understanding of the learner's knowledge and the way in which they are able to visualize and apply it in a given context. So that is what is predominant in this competency-based testing. Next, we have another important aspect of that, which is being followed here now, is the structured assessment for analyzing learning. So it is in this context, it talks about test only the core concept and try to move away from rote learning. So your question should not ask only the recalling type or giving definition or stating the theorems or laws or anything. So you should be able to give more scope for application of those ideas in a given situational context. So that should be your main concern. And your school level data will be shared for development of learning outcomes. So for this, whatever you are trying to do it within your own subject, you can discuss with your colleagues and try to see in which subject, how they are performing. So bringing in changes in their own approaches, how it enhances the institutional outlook also can be looked into. Then assessment applicable for all. So it is not exclusively saying for government sector or private sector. So no distinction wherever the learner is learning. So every kind of testing that we do, it must be applicable for all kinds of learners. The data to be used for continuous monitoring and for improvement. So this is another program that we are, NCERT has already started this. So where they are going to create a data of every learners through the various boards and the schools with UGC data. And they try to continuously monitor the learning activity and try to bring in varieties of interventions. So this is what the competency-based assessment is talking about. And our policy 2020 is also focusing us and enabling us to empower our learners to competency-based assessment, which can be held at the international level. So as we all of us know that as an international competitions, we had gone into the PISA, Performance of International Standards of Assessment. India participated 2 years back. Only Kendriya Vidyalaya schools participated, selected schools in that. 72 nations took part in that. So India stood in the bottom 2. Okay, so that means that our learning, we are only focusing on the textbook, we are focusing on the board examination, and we are not into focusing on the individual competencies of the each learner, which empower them for global competition. So that is what we need to move towards, and we need to empower and bring changes in our practices. So that's what it is. Okay. Thank you for all your patience. If you have any questions, kindly do ask me.